It's over. Nashville Predators lose 5-3 to the Colorado Avalanche in Game 4, which means the Preds are swept for the first time in franchise history. We will discuss what went wrong and who's to blame for the Preds' collapse towards the end of the season. Plus, I guess good news. Roman Josi is a Norris finalist. Juuse Saros is a Vezina finalist. We'll talk about their chances to win today on a very somber Locked On Predators podcast.
You're Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Predators your first listen of the day. I'm Nick Morgan. I'm a writer and editor at ontheforecheck.com, and I have a partner in crime.
You do. I am Ann Kimmel. I'm a writer at ontheforecheck.com.
And does it feel like we were kind of talking about this like yesterday after the show?
Mm-hmm.
It just felt like everyone, you and I included, the Preds fan base, we kind of went into last night's game with just the mentality of let's just get this over with. Like let's just let this thing die. And we went into that with mentality, but it's very weird because the Predators, our fan base, the team, their whole identity is like never give up, never say die. We play our best when our back's against the wall. But I don't know what it is about this year, and like this last few months has just made me defeated, sort of.
Mm-hmm. And I think part of that mentality is, it's great. It gets you a lot, but eventually where it leads is emotional exhaustion. And I think that's kind of the point that Predators fans have hit with this team. And I think you look back at Rene at the end of the season retiring, and you look at the up and down of this season where expectations were low. Oh, wait a minute. We've got these records breaking. We've got, a great performance from Saros in net, and expectations kind of shifted. And then we hit the All-Star break and it just kind of fell apart. And then you make it into the playoffs after a disaster of a game against the Arizona Coyotes, and you make it into the playoffs and you perform so poorly in the playoffs. I think everybody is emotionally exhausted from this whole Nashville Predators experience right now because nobody knows what to hang on to. When you look at this team, what do you hang on to?
Yeah.
We're tired.
Yeah, there is. And again, there are so many ways that we can take this post-series discussion. And hey, the good news is we have an entire week of shows. So we're not going to get to all of the angles, all of kind of the breakdown today. But trust me, there's plenty to talk about throughout the week. And so be sure you're tuning in because everything, like if you have a question, if you have a prevailing thought, if you have a hot take, chances are we've thought of it too, and we have a show planned around it. So do not fret if something you want covered isn't exactly talked about today, because we have so much time to kind of think about what's next for the Nashville Predators. And that's the $1 million question, is what's next for the Nashville Predators. We will touch on some of that today, but first let's talk about last night, Game 4. Predators lose 5-3. This was a game, and it sounds like faint praise in this point, but the Preds played very, very well. In fact, in the third period, kind of looked like they were on the up and up, maybe had a chance to win it. And then two very, very quick goals kind of steered it in the other direction. 5-3 was the final. And what was your one word to describe last night's game?
My one word to describe last night's game is huck-topsy. So when something dies and nobody can quite pinpoint the exact reason for the death, you do an autopsy. Well, we need to do a hoctopsy because this Nashville Predators season died a horrible death in 4 games, the first sweep in franchise history. And we really need to figure out why that is. And of course, you have the obvious factors. The Colorado Avalanche are a great team. They are a Stanley Cup favorite, and all of that. But there are elements of this failure, this end of the season, that really have to be looked at by the Nashville Predators. And so I think when you talk about last night's game, you talk about we had a much better performance. It looked like the Predators were going to win. Oh, wait, the Predators couldn't hold on to a lead. There's a lot more underlying things there that Predators fans and Predators front office and Predators locker room are taking a close look at. So my one word to describe last night's game is hoctopsy.
Yeah. you summed it up.
Yeah.
That's perfect. And I really don't have much to add to that because that's such a good summary of kind of where the Preds are.
Yeah.
To me, my one word was Corleone, as in Michael Corleone from Godfather Part 3. And for those of you who haven't seen Godfather Part 3, number one, don't waste your time because that was the worst Godfather in the series. But this was kind of talked about the tail end of Michael Corleone, aka Al Pacino's character in the Godfather series. It was kind of his later years in life. And, he went into the movie, he was kind of estranged from his family, wound up getting kind of back into the game, sort of got back to his mojo a little bit. Things started going a little bit right for him. He was back with Kay, his wife. He had kind of reconnected with his kids. Everything was going right. And it just looked like, oh, okay, well, maybe, we went into this movie with him being an absolute asshole and kind of being in this awful situation. And, oh, look, he's going to change. He's going to learn something from it. He is going to end on a high. And what happens is he meddles in some stuff. He gets his daughter killed. And the last shot of him is him basically dying alone. And it's nobody's around him but his little dog. And that's kind of the thing was, hey, it looked like he was going to go on the up and up, rebuild everything, learn from his mistakes. And then right at the last minute, it's like, nope, his fate was sealed. And I feel that way about the Nashville Predators from really this entire series. It felt like, we went into it sort of expecting them to, you can freezing cold take this all you want, but I did think the Nashville Predators were going to compete. We have said that multiple times that we didn't think the Preds would win, but we thought they would compete. We thought they, would bring the fight. And just as every game went on, it was just, I found myself watching the games and just saying, I don't know who this team is. This is not the Nashville Predators we're used to seeing. This is not the Nashville Predators we saw 2 months ago. They are a shell of the team that got them to this point. And, the further the Colorado series went on, their fate was pretty much sealed as the series went on. And then, even in game 4, you kind of had this moment where you're like, oh, maybe things will go out. Maybe they'll, they still might lose the series, but they get to go out in front of their home fans on a high, kind of give one last tribute to the Smashville faithful. And then they blew that too by 2 things really of their own volition, 2 kind of blown plays, although credit to Cale Makar because that setup was absolutely beautiful to Marina Skushkin on that 4th.
Oh my gosh.
Goal. That was a highlight reel worthy shot. And then Devin Tays, that part down shot to tie things up. Kind of ironic that it happened when Matt Duchene was injured on the other side of the ice.
I know.
Considering what happened in an earlier game with the Avalanche this year. Different story for another day. But yeah, I mean, it just deflating. Deflating is the word, Anne.
To see the game end, towards the end, and to see things shift, and you have a Nashville Predator in the penalty box sitting there watching the Colorado Avalanche score a power play goal. It's like, this is the most apt and horrible way to summarize this postseason series and a lot of the struggle that this team has had in the recent regular series. Just little Filip Forsberg with his face pressed up against the penalty box glass, just watching the season be flushed down the drain. I mean,
I'm picturing that as like a disappointed kid who can't afford to go into like the candy store at Willy Wonka. Like Charlie,
not Willy Wonka, not Willy Wonka.
It's the first scene where Charlie is like looking sadly through a window at all the other kids having fun.
Yeah, but not Willy Wonka. But yes, it just, it was like, this is so pathetic and awful and sad and horribly appropriate to see the last, 2 minutes of the Predators season end with a man advantage for the Colorado Avalanche. We've said it all season. Penalties were going to cost this team. And there are a lot of other things going on with this team. And like Nick said, we're going to break that down as the week goes on. But how apt to have it kind of go out like that, This season ended not with a bang, but with a whimper.
Yeah. So I want to get into kind of the big picture of the Nashville Predators season and maybe kind of pinpoint what went wrong. How did we get to this point? And maybe some clues last night as to the future of this team. That's something very interesting that we're going to talk about. But first, though, I want to take a moment to mention today's show brought to you by our friends at Bet Online. Bet Online continues to be the number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. You can find the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball, the rest of the Stanley Cup Finals, fights, and even next season's NLF futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoff info, esports, and more. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. So yeah, as Anne mentioned, there's a lot of angles that we're going to be covering in the next few days. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about what needs to happen with this team moving forward. Some specific changes. Is David Poile going to be back? Which is a very interesting conversation considering some of the talk around the NHL. Also, what's Filip Forsberg's future? Should the Preds re-sign him at this point? That's another thing. So those are a couple episodes we have coming up later in this week. For now, though, and kind of want to talk big picture and what went wrong for the Nashville Predators this season. Where do you think it just kind of all fell apart?
I wish I had a really succinct answer to that question. And I think it could be an easy answer if you didn't look at things like Matt Duchene's season, Roman Josi season, Filip Forsberg season, Juuse Saros season, because those are sort of the hiccup in the bell curve of what in the heck went wrong with the Nashville Predators. This is a competitive rebuild year. We're going to come to rue the day we heard those words from David Poile for sure.
Really put us all off track, didn't it?
Like, what does that even mean? Well, if this is it, we'd like a different kind of rebuild. But I think there are these anomalies that make this season a little bit more tricky to pin down. The anomalies of those players having great seasons. You had Tanner Jeannot having a breakout year. So I really think this is one of the most difficult hoctopsies to do, because there are some obvious things. Obviously, penalties were a problem, but it makes you go back and wonder, did the Predators, is the style of play that the Predators committed to this season and have been committed to for a long period of time, is that sustainable with the lineup that we have? I think the answer to that is obvious. And is it going to be a style of play that's going to be competitive in the NHL moving forward, even if you get the right pieces in there? So there are a lot of deeper questions. You can say it's penalties. You can always do it's the injuries. I don't think Juuse Saros injury would change the outcome of the playoff series. For as fantastic as Saros is, he may have been able to steal a game, but Connor Ingram came in and did just fine, and the Predators were not going to win this. I look at the sort of where it jumped the shark for me is in the Arizona game, and that encapsulates the sickness of the Nashville Predators, to be up 4-0 and then to lose 5-4, and then you've just put yourself in a series with the Colorado Avalanche. Like, that is the moment where this team jumped the shark, where it was like, okay, we had reason to believe. You gave us some reasons to believe that this team could be better than what expectations were, but it just fell apart. I don't know. Like, how do you answer that question? How do you answer that?
And also, let's not forget the Calgary game from, 4 days before that Arizona game, where the Predators had a lead with 0.2 seconds left on the clock.
Come on.
And it kind of all fell apart from there. That was the Juuse Saros game, of course. But I kind of want to go back to what you talked about earlier, Ann, and whether you think this identity of the Predators is sustainable long term. And the thing is, if we're talking about just the identity, if we're talking about the style, then yeah, I think that is a sustainable thing, because we've seen it around the NHL. How the Preds, have kind of modeled themselves. That's not much different than what Calgary's doing right now. That's not much different than what the Boston Bruins have been doing for the past 10 years, and even there are elements of the Tampa Bay Lightning in how the Predators want to play. The fact of the matter is, it's just not being executed right. And you look at it, and I think that's maybe the most frustrating thing for me, Anne, is that this isn't, in past years, we look back at, big Predators stretch runs and we think, oh yeah, well, they got lucky. There's definitely a couple of games that could have gone either way that, Juuse Saros bailed them out on, or, they're down 3-1 in the third and then just mount this wild comeback. That was kind of the case in the past couple of Pred seasons. But when you go back and watch, the Predators' first half of the year when they were really, really hot, that wasn't the case. They weren't hot based on fluke.
Correct.
They were winning games the way good teams win games, which is they were getting lights out scoring from like their top playmakers. They were getting great goaltending. They were getting great contributions from their depth players. And yeah, they were playing with a very physical, strong forechecking style. So they were playing the game they wanted to play. The frustrating thing for me is that it got away from them as the season went on. And we kind of talk about, maybe a question I want to pose to you later is maybe who's to blame. There's plenty of it to go around.
There is, yeah.
But, that to me is maybe why this is such a damper. This isn't like last year against Carolina, where the Predators were clearly just lucky to be in the postseason and kind of had this very, very strong out of nowhere playoffs that kind of made you think that, this one or two things the Predators could
maybe,
yeah. This was watching the Predators break down as the year went on, get cold at the wrong time instead of hot at the right time. And then, what's the biggest identity thing we've heard from the Predators? That they've always played their best with their backs against the wall. Their backs against the wall their backs were there for the entire month, like the entire last month of the season. and they never found that fire. And that to me is the more concerning thing. It's not that the Predators are, the way they're built now, incapable of beating a team like Colorado. Maybe that can be a debate on what else needs to happen to get them there. But it's the fact that we have seen them play at that level. And then one day, as the season went on, they gradually fell way, 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 way below that level as the season went on.
So much about hockey, especially about the playoffs, is about timing. And Nashville didn't time their peak well. But again, it leads to another question. Why not? Why did this team click so well early in the season, but were not able to sort of push through and maintain that style of play, that level of play? And it's frustrating to not know the answer to that, because so many things point to this season working better than the outcome was. You had, again, record-breaking seasons for people. If you listen to any of the players, they talked about how tight this team was, that this is probably, Matt Duchene said, this is probably one of the tightest teams that I have been on. There's no clicks. Everybody's playing for everybody else. I think there was a lot of health mentally, emotionally, among the team in the locker room. And that's something that the Predators haven't seen for a while. So you have all of these things that make you think this should be a better season than how it ended. But something happened, and it happened right around the All-Star break. It's like, that break sort of just snapped the magic, and the Predators could never really get back to what we saw from them. And I think it's an interesting study in why that is. You can speculate, that style of play, it's wear and tear on the body and all that. I don't think that's it, because I don't think we saw a ton of injuries. I don't know.
I would say that the biggest injury of the year, other than Juuse Saros at the very end, which of course changed a lot of things, was Dante Favreau.
Yeah.
That was the biggest long-term injury, in the second half of the season. It's not like they were playing like a man down.
No, I mean, this was a team that health-wise was in good shape. This was a team, in March, they had a schedule where they could have made a ton of progress, and they didn't. And it's almost like, you talked about, this is a team that performs well when their back's against the wall. They did not perform well when they had the opportunity to, and they weren't under pressure. And it's a younger team, and I wonder if the pressure, coming down the stretch, trying to get into the playoffs, that April schedule was brutal. I wonder if maybe it was just more than what some of the young players could do. I don't know. And that is what is so frustrating about this year, is that it's a deep dive to get into what exactly happened. And it's a complex answer of what do you do next?
Well, and let's get back to the question we teased earlier, which is, who do you blame here?
Oof.
And the thing is, Anne, you can put blame on pretty much every group that's responsible for this. You can put the blame on the players, and they deserve a lot of it. As good as Roman Josi was in the regular season, he had a tremendous season, one of the best individual performances by a defender, in decades in the NHL. He did not show up for the postseason.
No.
Filip Forsberg, record-setting year for him, 40 goals. Much is made. He is going to get a big contract from somebody at the end of the season. He was absent for the playoffs, besides that one goal last night, which was his only point of the series.
And that was too little, too late. I mean,
to be fair, that did put him ahead 3-2 at that point.
Well, yeah, but you're in game 4 and you just now decide to show up. I mean, that's not going to help anybody.
It's fair. And there's so many other players, down the lineup. I'm not going to bring up Luke Kunin, but there's guys like Matthias Ekholm who played noticeably bad at times this playoff series. Other, Preds down the stretch that just didn't look as sharp as they did earlier this year. The Herd line showed up for the playoffs, but we talked about them being a little bit absent towards the end of the regular season. And then you can kind of say, well, this isn't a team learning from their mistakes. I mean, how many times have we talked about the penalties and sort of the reckless out of position plays? You can certainly blame him for that. Then there's John Hines. We love John Hines. We love the season that he has had. I think he deserves a lot of credit for, even putting the Preds in the playoffs. Because, hey, remember, this was a team that at the beginning of the season was picked dead or second to last in the division. So he deserves some credit for getting there. He deserves credit for kind of revitalizing guys like Matt Duchene, using Roman Josi in a creative way. He deserves a lot of credit. But at the same time, you look at some of his decisions down the stretch. We talked about the Kunin thing. Why are you kind of, resetting some guys but leaving other guys in that contradict the same reasons you're taking that first guy out? Why aren't you looking at a guy like Philip Tomasino or Cody Glass, who provided a spark to your team late in the season, and go, okay, well, I know they're not where they need to be in terms of their development, but is there a way we can use them right now that can kind of maximize what they're doing well? And maybe some of their line mates can maybe cut back on, their shortcomings, kind of make up for them. There's that. And again, I don't know how much I blame him for this, but there's, Juuse Saros' management down the stretch. And then, at the same time, you also have to blame him for some of the player mistakes, like the penalties, because this was, an issue down the stretch. We had talked about how John Hines was kind of laissez-faire about it for a long time, up until it started to cost them games. And then there's the front office.
This is
because I don't know what David Poile is doing. Like he says that this is a competitive rebuild, that he's kind of interested in maybe putting some pieces for the long term. But then he balks at chances to further his team long term. And then he will say things like, well, we didn't make a move because we really like this team. We don't want to trade all these pieces. We really think they can work together. They finally work together the way you want. And then you don't make a move because you're worried about the future. So there's like this circular logic that's contradicting itself. And, instead of moving in a direction, the Predators are moving in a circle. If Filip Forsberg's, if you think this may be his last year, then go for it. See what you can get out of this team. Because if Filip Forsberg leaves at the end of the season and his last lap, last lap around Bridgestone saluting the crowd last night,
it was slow and introspective, and it felt laden with meaning.
Did that not feel like Pekka Rinne a little bit in that Carolina game last year?
Yeah, it was a hard watch because after this series, the way that this series was played out, after, and I agree with you. I think it's hard for anybody to pin down what direction this organization is going. And then watching that last lap, you go to bed last night thinking, I've probably seen Filip Forsberg in a Predators uniform playing for the last time. That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the reality they're playing now. And it's just, boy, if Filip is not back in Nashville next season and this last stretch run was all for naught, I mean, that's
a nail in the coffin of David Poile.
That's a fireable offense.
100%.
And again, there's a lot to get to on this. We will for certain. That's something we're going to be talking about tomorrow. Forsberg, we're going to be talking about a little bit later in the week. Lots of other content as well. But I feel like we need a palate cleanser, Anne.
Oh, Lord, do we ever. Get
And
out the Captain Morgan.
there was some good stuff over the past
There was.
couple of days. We have 2 Preds up for awards. It kind of
Love
looked
it.
like that shot. I put up 3 fingers, but I was really doing this, and I think the thumb just wasn't closed all the way. Don't me. I know how many 2 is. Don't worry, internet.
Don't come at us.
We have Roman Josi nominated for the Norris Trophy, and we have Juuse Saros earning his first Vezina nomination today.
All right. What do you think about this Vezina nomination for Juuse Saros? Were you surprised by it? What did you think?
A little bit, because I think players had maybe sexier stats, like more shutouts. I thought somebody like Darcy Kemper might get up there for the way he's played. But is Shayna Goldman from The Athletic put out together a great article kind of detailing Juuse Saros' case. And he was really one of the kings of the microstats in the NHL this season, where he is, leading in a lot of things like, stolen wins, i.e., he took more games the Predators should have lost and turned them into wins than any other goaltender in the NHL. He's also one of the best in saves above replacement, which means he's making harder saves than your typical NHL goalie. And he's one of the best in high danger saves, which means, the shots right in front of the net, the rebound, tips, he's getting a better handle on that than his counterparts. So it's really interesting to me that, finally voters are starting to kind of look deeper into the stats, instead of, just looking at save percentage and shutouts and all that junk. They're kind of looking more into the story of the game. So happy for Juuse Saros in that remark. That same thing might keep Roman Josi off of a Norris win.
Oh my goodness. I thought he had a fantastic season, record-breaking season for him personally with the franchise, also climbing, NHL records, done some things that haven't been done in so long. But I don't know how this is going to pan out. And it's a good thing that the vote is over when the vote is over, because Roman Josi did himself no favors. If you look at this series and and we love Roman Josi, think he's fantastic. But if you look at the performance of Roman Josi and you compare it to Cale Makar, this is a very different looking Norris Trophy vote. But Josi had a lot of offensive points. I don't know. Do you think? I don't know. For a long time, I was like, he is a for sure Norris Trophy winner. He is for sure going to win the Norris. I don't know.
He's the odds-on favorite right now, and it's going to be very interesting because you could arguably make a case. And I know in the past, I've kind of lambasted this argument, and I want to make it clear: I don't have a problem people voting for Cale Makar for Norris Trophy. I don't have a problem with that. I think for me, what irked me was some of these, writers who are, completely discrediting what Roman Josi had done.
Right.
The takes where it's like, oh, I'd have him. I don't even have him on my ballot. I have Devon Toews out there and Jacob Slavin because, their metrics were better. I saw one post where it said Matt Grzelcyk was, more deserving of the Norris Trophy than Roman Josi. That's the kind of stuff that irks me. I don't have a problem with people voting for Cale Makar because he has had a good season. And a lot of the stuff we said about Roman Josi when he won the Norris 2 years ago over John Carlson, you can probably make that same argument. It's just, for me, the interesting thing about the Norris is it's going to come down to like how the voters see it. Is Roman Josi's historic season, numbers that haven't been seen in 30 years. He's being mentioned along the likes of people like Brian Leach and Ray Bourque, some of the Hall of Fame defensemen to play this game. He is in that category. Is that just enough to completely blow people away and saying, this guy was center of an offense that had so many big stars emerge this season, and he was central to that? Do voters look at that? Or do they look at somebody like Cale Makar, who had a very impressive offensive season, And do they look at that and say, well, his numbers were not historic, but equally as impressive, and he's got the edge in all of these actual defensive metrics. So
Right.
maybe he's more well-rounded. It is going to be very interesting what the voters decide. I could see this going either way.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so much of it is about interpretation of what the award is and how you gauge it. It's not consistent across the board. It's really, there is a window for interpretation. And when you have something, you have a player who is making history and setting records, how does that weigh against the defensive metrics of a defender award? So yeah, this is going to be, I think it's going to be very interesting. I don't think we're going to see Juuse Saros win the Vezina.
No, probably not.
I don't, but thank you for the nod. We appreciate that. But I would love to see Josi win the Norris. I don't know. I would have told you in March it was a lock. But it doesn't not much feels like a lock this morning.
Is Roman Josi on the Hart ballot, do you think? If you're talking about most valuable player to your team, if that's the way that award's defined.
I can see that. The problem is the Preds limped to the finish.
Yeah.
And I think that is what hurt them. The Predators limped to the finish. And you can sort of asterisk that with they had one of the toughest schedules in April. You can asterisk that with, this, that, and the other thing. But they really did limp to the finish. And I don't know how much that finish is going to cancel out strong performance and his value to this team through most of the season. It's a lot about perception.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think you might see him in like the top 8, maybe the top 6. I don't think he's one of the 3 finalists, though.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe someday.
Maybe.
Yeah. Well,
not this year.
Yeah. Well, obviously, there is still so much to get to the bottom of. Tomorrow we're going to talk about what the Preds need to do in the offseason. What are they going to do moving forward? Is David Poile the answer? One of the big questions surrounds Filip Forsberg. What is going to happen with him? Is it in the Preds' best interest at this point to re-sign him? Or is it in better interest to kind of cut their losses? That is an interesting argument of itself. Plus so many things. Just because the Preds season is over doesn't mean there's not going to be anything to talk about. In fact, now that the season's over, there's probably more we can talk about.
True. Yes.
So be sure you're tuning in every single day. We'll have fresh content to you and some spicy discussion. And we're also going to have another Hot Take Tuesday coming up here in a little bit. So we're going to give you a chance for you guys to sound off on the direction of the team, what you think should be done, what moves would you make if you're GM, all that good stuff. Until then, Ann, where can the people find you online?
You can find my work at ontheforecheck.com, and you can find me on Twitter at AnnK_Mama on Ice.
I'm Nick Morgan. You can find me at ontheforecheck.com. If you're on Twitter, be sure to follow the podcast at LO_Predators. If you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment. Let us know what you think the Preds should do this offseason. That's going to do it for us today on the Locked On Predators podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We'll be back tomorrow with more Preds talk. In the meantime, go check out the Locked On NHL podcast. We'll see you, everybody.